I once watched a speech on the nanny state by Brendan O'Neill, who said he didn't like the term nanny state for two reasons. One of them was because he thought the term much too cutesy and benign to describe the insidious authoritarian nature of attempts to control how we live our lives. The other reason was that because as a child he called his grandmother Nanny, as did I. And his nanny drank stout for breakfast and smoked like a chimney and lived a very long life. Likewise, my nanny loved sweet treats. She didn't exercise the way we're told to exercise today, and she didn't like eating salad. The lifestyles of our nannies were the antithesis of how the nanny state would like to see us behave. But for those who didn't call their grandmothers nanny while growing up, the term points to something rather more sinister. The nanny of the nursery, the paid provider of childcare, the strict and overpowering overseer, the person who applies arbitrary bedtimes, feeding schedules and closely supervised outings. The harsh nanny is somebody who makes decisions for you and doesn't trust you to make mistakes. Nanny does what she does for your own good. So when we talk about the nanny state, we're talking about the tendency for government and government bodies to make laws or levy taxes on a raft of lifestyle activities for our own good. We see it in action in Australia, in bicycle helmet laws, seatbelt laws, the banning of recreational drugs, laws against smoking in public, laws governing retail trading hours, plain packaging of cigarettes, anti-nicotine vaping laws, movie and games classifications, over-the-counter codeine restrictions, lockout laws, street drinking laws, prostitution laws, and jaywalking laws. That's quite a list, and it's not even comprehensive. The nannying manifests as nudging and hectoring in the form of food pyramids, exercise guides, and mind-numbing slogans whose aim it is to cajole us into eating 2 + 5 serves of fruit and veggies each day. Have you heard of BETA, the behavioural economics team of the Australian government? BETA is our very own nudge unit. Their mission is to manipulate you into making more rational choices, the assumption being that the behaviour they desire from you is rational, whilst your preferred preferences are not. In their own words, they want to find new ways to improve the lives of all Australians, because we're not capable of doing this ourselves. And it's not just government departments who are guilty of it. Influential celebrities sometimes lever their popularity to try and make us better. Jamie Oliver is one example. He's outspoken about the diets of the poor. He's appalled that they would rather choose large screen TVs than spend their money on organic fruits and veggies. It wouldn't be so bad if the nannying only came in the form of this kind of warning and advice, but it goes beyond this. Jamie Oliver doesn't just dish out dietary advice to the plebs. He actively campaigns for legislation that would force people to behave in a way that he thinks is best. He successfully campaigned for a sugar tax in the UK on soft drinks, and now he wants to extend it to milkshakes. He wants a ban on junk food advertising and 2-for-1 pizza deals in supermarkets. And his reach extends to Australia, as he calls for us to adopt similar measures. He calls the sugar tax a tax for love, even though a sugar tax only works to reduce consumption on people who are so poor they literally cannot afford the extra pounds and are therefore forced to go without. Mission accomplished. Jamie may be right about the dangers of sugar. Eating less sugar is probably something we could all benefit from. There's no doubt that his motivations are good, but it has to be our own choice. Levying a lifestyle tax is paternalistic and unjustly punishes those who can afford it least. Meanwhile, the government enjoys a boost in revenue as others continue to consume soft drinks. But it's not just taxes. Activities that don't actually have a victim have been made crimes. And even the smallest of fines for things like not wearing a seatbelt or a bicycle helmet that are designed to improve your behaviour or save you from harm are enforced at the point of a gun if ultimately you refuse to pay them. Often, as is the case with any well-meaning intervention, negative unintended consequences result from these laws. Laws that prohibit products that people actually want, like recreational drugs or cigarette packets without gory pictures on them, inevitably result in a black market. The consequence is that police resources are taken up with prosecuting victimless crimes, to the point that more laws are enacted to undermine the organised crime networks that service these markets. Another perverse consequence of these laws is that they may be based on inaccurate or wrong information. How many times has nutritional science declared certain foods unhealthy, only to change their recommendations after new information comes to light? Imagine if during the 80s we had a tax on eggs in an attempt to get us to eat less of them. Do you think we would easily shed ourselves of that tax once it was in place? Even if, as science has now shown us, that eggs are good for us, do you think we would get a refund? Even the most unhealthy lifestyle choices, though, ought to be ours to make without punishment or hardship. And in making these decisions, we get to think for ourselves and exercise our moral autonomy. As John Stuart Mill said, the human faculties of perception, judgment, discriminative feeling, mental activity, and even moral preference are exercised only in making a choice. In other words, it's good for us to weigh up the pros and cons of wearing a bicycle helmet or drinking in bars till 4 a.m, and then come to a decision based on our own preferences and needs. Being forced to make a choice through the edicts of the state diminishes us all. John Locke, the Enlightenment philosopher, had this to say about it. What if he neglect the care of his health or of his estate? Will the magistrate provide by an express law that such a one shall not become poor or sick? Laws provide that the goods and health of subjects be not injured by the fraud and violence of others. They do not guard them from the negligence or ill husbandry of the possessors themselves. No man may be forced to be rich or healthful, whether he will or no. So, laws should only exist to protect us from fraud or harm from others, not to force us to live healthy or wealthy lives. Ultimately, we are responsible for the lives we lead. But the overriding irony in Australia about laws designed to protect us from ourselves is that we are forbidden by the state to protect ourselves from real threats. It's illegal in Australia for any person to carry a weapon for self-defence in the absence of imminent danger. Obviously, that includes firearms, but it's also illegal to carry mace or pepper spray. In all states except Western Australia, mace and pepper sprays are classified as prohibited weapons. You can't even legally buy them without a permit, and permits are not issued for the purposes of self-defence. In WA, it's more confusing. Mace and pepper spray are restricted weapons, which means you can buy them, but you can't actually carry them with you, unless there are reasonable grounds to suspect that you may be attacked. In 2014, journalist Claudia Fleurs was found to be carrying a small keyring with a pocket knife and a 10mm canister of mace in her backpack on her way into court to cover a case. Although ultimately her case was thrown out by the magistrate, she endured months of stress and anxiety, knowing that the maximum penalty in New South Wales for carrying a prohibited weapon is 14 years imprisonment. In most states of Australia, if you're carrying pepper spray and use it to ward off an attacker, you can potentially be charged not only with possessing and using a prohibited weapon, but also with assault. So despite the fact that the state is very concerned about how many vegetables we eat or what substances we put into our bodies, they aren't so worried about whether we can protect ourselves from real or present danger. It seems like a contradiction on the surface, but really it isn't. If the state doesn't trust you to eat properly or go home to bed early enough on a Saturday night, how on earth will it trust you to defend yourself against imminent harm? The nanny state believes it knows best, and if it can't come to your rescue when you need it the most, then that's just too bad. It's the nanny state's way or the highway. At every opportunity, we need to call out the perverseness of nanny statism and declare it for what it really is, an authoritarian tendency to control the masses by people who think they know better than you or me about our own lives. And that's enough for me. Time to hear from our next speakers. Thank you. Our next speaker is Campbell Newman. Campbell is the former Premier of Queensland and former Lord Mayor of Brisbane. As Premier, his government was praised by many libertarians for significantly reducing government expenditure, but also heavily criticised for the anti-bikie laws, which went against the principle of freedom of association, Recently, he has called for drug legalisation in the media. Please make him welcome.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute thrill to be here today. I'm coming next year if I possibly can for the whole conference, because it's been refreshing to see so many men and women who actually have got it together, who haven't sort of gone off with a large number of our fellow Australians, drunk some sort of strange Kool-Aid and developed some really weird ideas. And frankly, they need our help. So it's great to be here. Well, just to kick off this afternoon, one of the things you need to understand about Campbell Newman, the brand, is that the brand has a very strange sort of image out there, which at times I don't recognise myself. So the first thing I say to you is, for those who perhaps would reflect on the bikie issue, and probably I don't have time this afternoon to talk about that, but I'm actually one of the most libertarian people probably in recent sort of decades to ever have a job as a state premier. Frankly, it's like this. I really distrust government. I distrust bureaucracy. I don't like laws and red tape. And I really it really gets up my nose when people are telling me about how to live my life. And that's frankly why I went into politics. And particularly when I made the decision to go from the Lord Mayoralty of Brisbane to the position of Premier and to go on that direction, I really wanted to cut waste and inefficiency in government, yes, make sure we could still deliver the important services, but particularly launch a huge assault on red tape and bureaucracy. And we did really have a go at getting rid of a whole lot of laws while we were in government as well, which doesn't get talked about too much, but that's an actual fact. So to get into the topic this afternoon, I have to start with this thing. How do Australians see themselves? Well, I'll put a bit of a hypothesis to you. Australians think of themselves as rugged, resilient individualists, carving a living from this very difficult country of climatic extremes, a harsh country, but you know what? Rising to the challenge of cyclones, droughts and whatever, even though they might live in Footscray. Well, of course it's bosh. It's complete bullshit, because they're not. I'm afraid, and this is the sad and sobering thing that we need to reflect on this afternoon, is they're actually increasingly, steadily, inexorably dependent on government. Now, I particularly blame the media. Of course, I blame the left of politics, but it's been a constant thing, particularly since the Whitlam years, where people have been told that government is the solution, that government can fix all. Think about the normal spot on the nightly news, and it doesn't have to be the ABC, the commercial channels are right with this program, that is, something's gone wrong. Premier, Lord Mayor, Prime Minister, what are you going to do about this? And that really has engendered a viewpoint in the community that it is government's fault, that government must fix it with some sort of legislative fix, a tax, an impost, a regulation, a new commission, some tribunal to deal with these things. My sobering message this afternoon, therefore, and I'm happy to be challenged during the Q&A, is that Australians love red tape. They like their nanny state. And if you don't believe me, well, perhaps in some of the things I'll talk about in the next few minutes, perhaps we'll start to give you that insidious feeling that it is the case. I think Australians want the intervention of government. They want the nanny state. And by the way, it's not just for the broader community. When I was Lord Mayor and then when I was Premier, I really worked hard to actively engage with the business community. For example, as Premier, I had a thing called the Premier's Business Roundtable. We would have quarterly meetings, we'd have the representatives, all the peak business groups, have the Property Council, the Master Builders Association, you'd have the AMA there, I suppose. You'd have all these peak bodies in the room able to have their say. I think Steve Baxter's here at this conference. I don't know if he's in this session, but he used to come along as well because of the startup sort of technology part of business. And my big thing always was in those meetings, tell us, ladies and gentlemen, tell us what regulation you want to see go. Tell us what we can eliminate. Don't bring us just problems and bitches. Happy to have those, but tell us what we can do as a government to get rid of the red tape and bureaucracy. And I've got to say, on occasions we did get a few good ideas, but on the whole, crickets. So it's even infected the business community. And I just hasten to add, and maybe it's a digression, but I think at times regulation, of course, suits various industry sectors. My own daughter works in the waste industry. I think they love regulation in the waste industry because it's a barrier to entry, keeps others out. So let's have a look at some of the things that have gone on in this country in the last few years. The one that particularly annoys me, is very personal, is this Panadine ban. Now, I'm 55 years old in a few weeks' time. I get migraines occasionally, only occasionally, and when I do, the only thing that will deal with it is Panadine taken promptly. I get a funny feeling. If I get one into me then, or a couple into me then, I know I'm going to be right. If I don't, I can be out for 4 or 5 hours in a dark room. I've been taking Panadine responsibly since I was a teenager. But now, thanks to a splinter group of the medical profession lobbying the Therapeutic Goods Association Authority, I now have to go and get a prescription. In fact, even before that, I'd go to the chemist and get challenged. You know, I'm just before this sort of ban came in, I went to Chemist's Warehouse in Brisbane and had to go through 20 questions about why I should take, why I should get a prescription. Sorry, why I should get this request filled for a packet of Panadine. Madness. So, law-abiding, responsible, grown-up, tertiary qualified, worked in high office, served the community, but can't go and get a packet of Panadine. Of course, if I wanted to go around the corner, perhaps to a kilometre or two away, I could walk into any back street in Fortitude Valley and buy serious illegal drugs. You know? So that's just immediately a sort of a perverse paradox almost. The law-abiding, the intelligent are being compromised in terms of their rights and their freedoms by a stupid law. And what saddens me is that the Liberal Party that I'm a member of, ultimately through the LNP in Queensland, couldn't see that they should have actually opposed this. That says a lot about where they're going as well. And my point is that a lot of this stuff started, of course, with the left, but it has now infected the Liberal Party and at times the National Party as well. While I'm on the subject of drugs, and this goes back to the bikie thing, the bikie business model is in Queensland, certainly it's about drugs, illegal drugs, it's about methamphetamines, it's about ice. They're the producers, they're the distributors, they're the enforcers, it's their business model. And frankly, the way to put them out of business is to actually have a far more enlightened view about how we deal with this problem. It's a public health issue. It's something that has sucked up huge amounts of police time. Frankly, I suspect it has corrupted our police. I believe it's corrupted our instruments of government, and it's time for a more enlightened view on all that. Another one Nicola touched on, which is the sugar tax. And really, this one gets my goat too, particularly coming from Queensland with the sugar industry. But I particularly point out what is happening here. Remember some of what Nicola was saying. It's the nanny state thing is nanny's there looking after you. You're not responsible. And if you really want to see the problem with where we're going on this one, it's when these peak medical groups get on the ABC and say, no, that person who's obese, it's actually not their fault. It's not their fault, it's the sugar fault, or it's McDonald's and the fast food company's fault. The immediate consequence of that approach is a complete removal of personal responsibility. I think we all get that here today. Now, my view on this whole issue is it's about time the AMA, and indeed other peak medical groups, had the courage to tell their members they need to go into the consulting rooms and tell their patients, you're overweight. You need to do something about it. You'll get diabetes. You'll have a heart attack. And put it back on people rather than actually saying to someone who loves fast food, loves sugary drinks, has a heck of a lot of it and drinks a heck of a lot of alcohol as well, look at me. I run every morning, so that's my trade-off, but I don't want to pay more for my sugary drinks or my McDonald's burgers. I know I'm probably starting to consume a bit of time. You're going to gong me. You're going to gong me if someone's down there. I can't see anything down there. It's just lights. All good, okay. Another one that I think has been particularly insidious in the last few years is on this issue of alcohol and nightlife policies. We've seen here in New South Wales some very retrograde policies in terms of trying to deal with alcohol-fueled violence, when really my view is that this whole thing should have been about putting it on to lawbreakers, to people who can't behave themselves, and having a very carefully thought out strategy that deals with the people who create the problems rather than the vast majority who just want to have a great night out. And sadly, the New South Wales, again, Liberal government, have basically adopted a slew of measures which we know has killed the nightlife and the night industry, entertainment industry in this city, and haven't quite seen as bad an outcome in Queensland, but there's been some pretty retrograde things happening there. Perhaps moving to a bigger picture issue, which sort of is the nanny state as well, and it's current right now, is this whole thing about the Royal Commission into the banks and financial services regulation. We have a regulator, ASIC, who has a bundle of laws at their disposal. I actually work in financial services these days. I run a commercial property funds management business. I know about what's required for financial services licensing in this country, and I can tell you now, the legislation is overwhelming. The regulations are comprehensive. I have got stacks of folders, probably that high, with the things I've got to understand about the little business. It's only 3 guys buying a few properties for our partner investors, but that's what we have got to know and comply with. And frankly, at any moment, we know we could be picked up on some small issue. So we've got enough laws, got plenty of regulation. What's really going wrong? Well, there's a group of people out there who've been breaking the laws. There's a group of people out there who are dishonest and unethical, immoral, and we need to go after them using the laws that we have right now. The perverse consequences of the Banking Royal Commission is that there may be more regulation and there may be more powers for ASIC, who already had enough. And what will that do? The effect of that will be to increase barriers to entry. It will be to make it harder for the small operators to survive, and it will make it easier for the top end of town to be there as sort of an oligopoly, because they can afford the lawyers and the accountants and the compliance people and the back offices to run these businesses. So the perverse effects of this Banking Royal Commission, I sadly predict, will be to lessen competition and entrench the majors after they've been suitably admonished and beaten around the head. So another case of this nanny state thing, because what should we really be doing? We should be educating the community in how to manage their money. We should be educating the community and putting our resources in there about the risks when they're investing, the things they should be looking for, and frankly, simplistically, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Look, I could go on, but I think I've given you a bit of a taste of some of the things that I think from the small to the big picture ones. But the fundamental problem that we have, I believe, is that Australians really have been educated to believe that government will solve these issues. If we, as a group, are to mobilise with our friends and associates and the like, really what we've got to be trying to do is educate people, in the words of Ronald Reagan, that government isn't the answer, it's actually the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Campbell. Just want to remind everybody that if they want to ask any of our speakers a question, to use the Hoover app to put your question in a comment there. That'll be good. Our next speaker is the Honourable Erin Stonehouse MLC. Erin is the youngest state member of Parliament in Western Australia and the first member of an Australian state parliament from a libertarian political party. Erin is known for being an advocate for lower taxes, individual responsibility and small government. He opposes the nanny state, red tape and any form of paternalism against grown adults. Please make him welcome.
Thank you, Nicola. As Nicola mentioned, I'm from Western Australia, and as you may know, we sandgropers like to think of ourselves as living in the Wild West. But I'll let you in on a pretty badly kept secret. It's not that wild anymore. The nanny statists are just as insidious over there as they are here, arguably more so with the election of Nanny McGowan, the bloke who wants to ban full-strength beer and tax every last drop of enjoyment out of our lives. I see the reality every day of the week in my life as a libertarian politician. In the last 12 months, the state government has called for the legal smoking age to be raised to 21. It's flirted with the idea of a floor price for alcohol and is currently implementing restrictions on the size of retail bottle shops in an attempt to combat cheap booze. Heaven forbid poor people should be able to afford a drink. Now, in Perth, I learned this recently, shots are actually illegal. Alcoholic shots are illegal in Perth. And so is mixing alcohol with energy drinks. So in Perth, ordering a Jaeger bomb is a serious crime. WA also has the heftiest fine in the country for vaping at $45,000. You build a slide in your backyard, you'll be fined. You don't have a fence around your pool, you'll be fined. You ride without a helmet, you'll be fined. You eat a bowl of cereal while driving down the freeway, and you'll be fined. And that last one is actually a true story. It was a P-plater. She got, I think, a $300 fine and lost a few demerits. These fun-hating do-gooders, and they really do hate fun. If you don't believe me, there's actually a bill before Parliament at the moment to ban party balloons. But these do-gooders, they have a sort of race to the bottom to eliminate risk from our lives. But where would we be without the freedom to take risks? What achievements could have been accomplished if the great men and women from history were wrapped in cotton wool? Would Burke and Wills have trekked across the inhospitable interior of Australia if they were risk-averse? Would Australia have been discovered at all if Dutch and British sailors were too afraid of the risks of sailing into the unknown? Or if John Monash figured, the risks of enlisting in the army were a little too great, he'd stay as a civil engineer? These hold-my-beer moments are what have made our world what it is today. Campbell Newman quoted from Reagan earlier. I'll use another Reagan quote. He said the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Now, he was right, of course, because more than just sucking the joy out of life, nanny state laws come with unintended consequences, side effects that may include moral hazard or a loss of personal responsibility. There's perhaps no better example of the failings of the nanny state than our prohibitionist approach towards tobacco control. While our efforts to curb smoking have not only failed, they've created an entirely new problem, black market trade in illicit tobacco. Sydney's own lockout laws, as was previously mentioned, while they've certainly reduced violence in the CBD, they've had the unintended consequence of increasing violent behaviour in neighbouring areas, as antisocial troublemakers simply move to new venues. The lockout laws have had the additional unintended consequence of devastating the live music scene and the nightlife culture in Sydney. It was alluded to earlier, but the healthy food pyramid was introduced by Nutrition Australia with the admirable intention of providing us with a model diet. Up until 2015, that pyramid had breads and cereals in the eat most category. For 35 years, the healthy food pyramid has been encouraging us to bulk up on carbs. So the nanny state has been making us all fat. Or at least that's my excuse. In 2008, the Rudd government amended the Trade Practices Act, so retailers would be compelled to display the total cost of goods. This was predicated on the assumption that consumers are too stupid to add up additional charges and fees. And while the Rudd government could feel smug about standing up for the little guy, the result was quite the opposite. For car companies, the task of adding up stamp duty, registration, luxury car taxes and dealer delivery fees proved far too difficult. A measure implemented by the nanny state with the intention of providing consumers with more information had the exact opposite effect. So now if you visit a major car company's website today, you won't find any prices, and you can thank the nanny state for that. So despite the long history of central planning failures, paternalism remains pervasive. There is a steady stream of public health advocates and lobbyists ever keen to justify their own existence, while rent seekers of every stripe peddle snake oil policies in exchange for government grants. They're Hubris and arrogance is on full display when they assume their own infallibility. Self-appointed experts are often driven by ego. They see themselves, as Thomas Sowell put it, as far-sighted people who need to take control and plan economic and social policies so that there will be rational and just order, rather than the chaos resulting from things being allowed to take their own course. To simply leave decisions to be made by society at large, through markets, isn't satisfying to the ego of a central planner. This must-do something approach to public policy is spread through our culture. There is a sort of mob mentality as people are whipped into an outrage frenzy. They see what they think is a problem, someone engaging in an activity that they disapprove of, and they demand action, high on their own sense of superiority and indignation. Think of the Parents Music Resource Centre, which fought a campaign against offensive content in music, culminating in a US Senate hearing with Dee Snider from Twisted Sister and Frank Zappa. It's a kind of tyranny of the majority, and it comes from a similar place as political correctness. In fact, I read that the late Lou Reed, the frontman of the Velvet Underground and the author of the classic track Walk on the Wild Side, had in recent years amended some of the lyrics of that hit song, particularly those that talk about coloured girls, so as not to offend anyone. Now, given that the song he was singing about was about a male prostitute and a transvestite in a drug-crazed suburb of New York, I don't know how he figured he wouldn't offend anybody. But if even the author of The Wild Side could be tamed by the machine, then we're in a world of trouble. Its reach is insidious and all-pervasive. But even in death, Lou Reed can't catch a break. Just last year, Walk on the Wild Side was accused of having transphobic lyrics by a university student group in Ontario after it was played at a campus event. The student group said the lyrics were problematic because they dehumanize and fetishize transgender people by suggesting they are wild. Whether it's thrust upon us by government or it's self-inflicted through mob mentality, this obsession with wrapping ourselves in cotton wool and eliminating risk from our lives is slowly killing us. We need risk in our lives. We need challenges. US-based kids' health expert Catherine Haleko may have put it best when she said that, and I quote, "Risk-taking might be scary for parents, but it's critical for kids, so go ahead, let them play." The concept that risk is positive for our kids isn't new to educators. They've recognised the merits of what they call risky play for children for years. And that risky play isn't seen as a negative. It's seen as a necessary developmental tool. Thrilling and exciting forms of play that involve the risk of physical injury are key to the development of a functional depth and speed perception, for example. If we wrap our kids in cotton wool and keep them indoors where they're safe, we almost certainly contribute to them growing up without the depth and speed perception that older generations gained through being active, by cycling, by climbing trees and occasionally falling out of those trees. What's the price of preventing a broken arm at age 7 if it leads to a potentially fatal car crash at age 17? The studies are there, freely available for you to examine. There's Ellen Sandsetter's Categorising Risky Play, undertaken in Norway in 2007, Mark Armitage's Risky Play, undertaken in Ireland in 2011, or for something closer to home, there's Helen Little and Naomi Sweller's 2015 study, Affordance for Risk-Taking in Early Childhood, undertaken at Macquarie University here in Sydney. Taking risks allows us to learn from our mistakes and overcome our fear of failure. By thinking and acting for ourselves, we develop confidence and self-reliance. If we're all submissive automatons who followed every rule and regulation, we'd be safer, we'd probably live longer, but we'd be missing the creativity and the out-of-the-box thinking that drives innovation. Trying new things means occasionally making mistakes. We all know deep down that we need to take risks if we want to achieve anything great in life. It's certainly true in business with entrepreneurs. It's true in our personal lives, and it's true if we just want to have fun. Throwing caution to the wind occasionally is good for the soul. Nanny state central planners are just as fallible as the rest of us. While they assume we're all plebs and simpletons who need protecting from ourselves, they can't possibly understand the motivations and desires of 24 million people in this country. And life should be about getting to where we want to be, not where central planners think we should be. Individuals are the best judge of their own actions, and they know their own goals and their own ends. As F.A. Hayek recognised, the world is complex, and too much intervention leads to unexpected outcomes. Therefore, a better way to serve the public good is to have laws that prohibit harm to others, rather than laws that impose restrictions on us for our own good. What a boring world would it be if there was no risk? To live is to make choices. And when making choices, there is a risk we'll make mistakes, but we shouldn't be prevented from making those choices or from facing the consequences of those choices. It occurred to me on the flight over that the service on an aeroplane is a bit like the nanny state. You wait in line, you have to sit in your assigned seat. The seatbelt rules are strictly enforced. The alcohol only comes in tiny little bottles. There's absolutely no smoking, and having sex in the bathrooms is strongly frowned upon. Now that might work for a few hours of flight, but that's no way to live. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. That's fantastic. I was in the UK recently, and I was in a little bar in Westminster, downstairs pub, and I was pleasantly surprised to see some coasters on the table informing us how beer taxes make our beers more expensive. And they're about to get higher again unless we take action. The man responsible for these subversive coasters is our next speaker. John O'Connell is the CEO of the Taxpayers Alliance in the UK, after working his way up the ranks from his starting position as an intern. He has authored many papers and reports focused on taxation and spending in the UK. John frequently represents the Taxpayers Alliance on television and radio, including prominent appearances on flagship broadcast programs and documentaries. Please make welcome John O'Connell.
Thanks, Nicola, and thanks everybody for coming along this morning. I think those beer mats are a good kind of nudge, actually. So we'll take that one. Brendan O'Neill, you mentioned him at the top, how he was talking about the nanny state, and the language of, or the phrase itself, the nanny state, was too soft. I'd agree with him. I'd also say that we often accept the language of the left or statists, or however you want to characterise them, in tax as well. We call all these things syntaxes, and we get sucked into this, and we also call them syntaxes in the UK, taxes on smoking, drinking, and whatever else. Of course, none of these things are sins. They're all, legal things that you can buy and purchase and do, and they're actually lifestyle taxes, and we need to change the language to reflect that, in my opinion. Because, of course, the tax system is a key weapon of these statists, nanny staters, whatever you want to call them. If you want to take a flight, you've worked hard and want to go on holiday, tax on that. You want to drive to work, drive to the supermarket to get your groceries or pick the kids up from school, tax, tax, tax. Smoke, tax, drink, gamble, you get the picture. Now in the UK, of course, we also have a tax on sugar. So that is despite the fact that we've seen it hasn't worked elsewhere, be it in Mexico or Denmark, where they introduced a fat tax that was repealed after 13 months because it fundamentally didn't work. People in the south of Denmark were driving across the border to Germany to buy exactly what they wanted for cheaper prices. So, funny that. It doesn't matter, though. It doesn't matter that the real-world evidence doesn't back what they say. They still want to control what you eat and your lives more generally. And the worst bit, of course, is that all of this hits the poorest hardest. The rich aren't impacted by any of this in any way, shape or form in the way that the poorest are. Flying's become much more reasonable and affordable for families who decades ago wouldn't have been able to take a flight to go on holiday, punished by tax. Driving, everybody in London, in the media, in politics, they take public transport everywhere or taxis and trains without realising that the rest of the country drive to jobs on modest incomes that is nowhere near the earnings of politicians and bureaucrats in London. And of course, smoking, plain packaging, they've regulated the colours that you're allowed to see with your own eyes, as far as I can tell. But all of this hits the poorest hardest. So what it boils down to is it's snobs using the power of the state to control the lives of the poor and the lives of those they consider to be much more stupid than they are. And behind all of this is a very small group of powerful people in the public health lobby in particular. That's formalised in the UK under the auspices of a government organisation called Public Health England, with 5,000 staff and a budget of £4.2 billion a year. That's a third of the police budget. And, you know, we're seeing crime spike in London at the minute, with murder rates at their highest since the early 2000s. Spates of shootings, stabbings and acid attacks, which are deeply concerning. But no, you know, we can spend a third of that budget on public health and interfering in people's lives. Nicola also mentioned celebrities. Jamie bloody Oliver. He introduced his own, he was very pious, obviously, but he introduced his own sugar tax in his own restaurants. And he said, right, I'm going to put 10p on serving sugary drinks in my own restaurants. So, okay, right. So you think that people who go to your restaurants are going to notice that 10p difference and not order the Coca-Cola, and they're going to get a water instead. All he's doing is taking 10p off unsuspecting patrons of his restaurants. It's just, if he had any guts whatsoever, he would have scrapped them off his menu, including the desserts that he publishes online when he worked for Sainsbury's for millions of pounds, but you never saw that. And James Cracknell, Olympic gold medalist, you know, rode in the fours, you know, rugged individual, tough, all the rest of it. He was on TV citing a survey that looked at sugar consumption broken down by country, and he was praising the country that came top of the list for not, you know, really consuming much sugar in their diets and all the rest of it. That country was North Korea. Yeah, he was on Sky News saying that North Korea was to be praised for, you know, it's the diets of the socialists, indeed, yeah. So I think I would rather, as I have done this morning, go to McDonald's, eat red meat, eat salted chips, drink fizzy drinks, than have the diet of your average North Korean. Thank you very much. How do they do all this? How do they get away with it? There's not that many of them. They're not representative of the country at large. The answer is they use academia as a halo. They stuff institutions full of their own people, and it's all sort of self-serving and pat each other on the back. And it gets to the case where it's borderline corrupt. Recently, the Sheffield Alcohol Research Group were commissioned, they're a research group out of the University of Sheffield. They were commissioned by Public Health England, that organisation I just mentioned, to report on what safe drinking levels were. Now, they produced this report, but that report was never published. It was subsequently, they then, a couple of months later, did publish a report which basically said that any alcohol was bad and there's no safe limit. It was subsequently found that in the intervening months, Public Health England had pressured them to change the results of their academic study. There were lots of emails revealed by freedom of information requests, and that, to me, that just smacks of corruption. They've said, you know, change the answers to your academic studies or we're not going to commission you again. All of this was, by the way, focused on at length by an academic in the UK called Christopher Snowdon. Hopefully some of you have heard of him. If not, I'd check him out because he seems to be, you know, a hero in the UK of fighting junk statistics and fighting academics on their own ground. He has a blog called Velvet Glove Iron Fist, and he also works for the Institute of Economic Affairs, so check him out and read his stuff because he's fantastic at this. Again, that halo of academia causes a big problem because the media suck it up immediately. They have nobody on their teams anymore who are, you know, statistically savvy, that will drill down into the figures and actually challenge things. They basically republish exactly what the academics send to them. And the academics have become quite adept at being good communicators. They send press releases with sensationalist headlines. And again, the the journalists just published them almost verbatim. Again, the someone must do something culture. My surname, O'Connell, I was in Ireland recently. I've got relatives over there, and a few people watching the TV. And they were talking about tooth decay in children. And then a doctor, or dentist rather, came on the TV and said, the government has to do something about this. And everybody in the room said, well, what are they supposed to do? Like, are they supposed to go into people's homes and brush the teeth of their children for them? So, you know, normal, everyday, sensible people seem to get this. But that's not as weird as it sounds, by the way, because in some of the work that Taxpayers Alliance have done, there was actually a person working for a council in Scotland who was a toothbrush coordinator, whose job it was to teach children how to brush their teeth, which I thought was done in the home by parents, but never mind. So that someone must do something culture is very pervasive in the UK. Campbell mentioned that people tend to like the fact that government does everything for them. I'm not sure about like. In my opinion, I think it's more that they expect it. The size of the state is such now that the welfare state is enormous. Spending as a percentage of GDP is wherever it is. The government has also commandeered charitable giving through massive overseas aid transfers and quite often other domestic charitable giving as well. So, through your taxes, you still give charitably, whether you want to or not. And I think that all-pervasive state means that people expect it, so we need to change that expectation firmly on its head. And we could do that by having braver politicians. There are a lot of free market politicians in the UK, especially a lot of younger ones, which is fantastic. But they won't speak up on these issues. They consider them to be quite lower order, something they're not willing to die in a ditch over when they've got bigger concerns on Brexit or the economy or whatever else it is. But the issue with this is it's not about sugar, it's not really about driving, it's not really about cigarette smoking, it's about fundamental freedom. So if we do have these champions of freedom in the UK, they need to recognise that these small issues that are exploited quite aggressively by statists are actually something they should be standing up against. Another problem for me is industry itself. It's very easy for me to say as a campaigner who basically can say what the hell I want when a microphone's put in front of me, but they have shareholders, they have legal teams and all the rest of it. But I'm afraid that they don't really have much backbone at the minute. Social media is the place where this is most prevalent in the UK. There's a group called Stop Funding Hate, and it's about 2,000 people or something like that, and they have a very sort of strong vendetta against the Daily Mail in the UK. So any company that advertises in the Daily Mail, they hound on Twitter and make them reverse their decision and blah, blah, blah. So there was a company called Clinton Cards, which is a greeting cards company. They advertised in the Daily Mail. They were hounded by this group. And then a day later, they not only said that they were going to withdraw advertising from the Daily Mail in future, they apologised for doing so to start with. Now, where's the backbone? We need industry to stand up for themselves. They sell legal products. What's the problem? Stick up for yourself. Stop being so, they always seem to want to work with government. They need to sometimes work against government and stick up for themselves. And the last point second to last point I wanted to make was, I've talked domestically, we've talked about Australia, we've talked about the UK. This issue is global. The World Health Organization in particular are quite a pernicious organisation in my view. They're very closed off. They don't let journalists into lots of their meetings. In fact, not only do they not let them in, if a journalist manages to get them to actually get in, they physically remove them. The guidance that they issue tends to become, law in countries. And most recently, they published a study on smoking cessation in Syria. And I'd wager that Syrians have a lot more things to worry about than smoking cessation. So the warped priorities of these people telling people what to do is quite mind-boggling. Last on practically what we could do, I take sort of personal, not responsibility, that would be $2,000, but in the think tank campaign group space, what we did wrong on the sugar tax is that we all attacked the same issues. We all published the same papers, we referenced the same things in the same studies, and it was all very repetitive. What we could have actually done is, got together as groups, say the Institute of Economic Affairs, to do the heavyweight research. The Taxpayers Alliance, we could have gone out onto the street and handed out fizzy drinks and done a lot more of the grassroots campaigning. We could have engaged with the CPS to talk to the Conservative Party MPs to stick up for families and taxpayers. So one thing I would say is for anybody in this room fighting this kind of stuff is to coordinate. Use your strengths. If you've got good researchers, use them for research, but don't copy their research. Don't ape the same things. So to, have a good sort of diversification of what you're doing to tackle these problems. So that's it from me. But I also wanted to add, just lastly, it's been a privilege to be here, and I wanted to thank Tim and his team, all the sponsors, all the way through to the volunteers who've helped put on a magnificent and actually quite inspiring couple of days, and like Campbell, I'll be back next year as well, where we'll be having the World Taxpayers Association conference with it. But I wanted to thank all of the team involved. Thanks very much.